One of the hardest parts about building any gaming PC is picking the right parts in the first place. It's a stage of the process where everything can go wrong before it's even really started, and it's perhaps the most important decision you'll make when building a gaming PC. And in this video, I'm going to hopefully make things a little bit easier by showing you guys how to pick the perfect balanced parts for a build, avoiding bottlenecks, making sure you get a system that performs well, and also one that doesn't cost you a stupid amount of money. I'll be talking you through my system of how I select the best parts for any given budget, and letting you guys in on a few of my secret little hints and tips. Let's do this! The GeekaWhat Aorus 15 lineup is equipped with the latest RTX 40 series GPUs for top tier performance. Plus, with display options up to Quad HD 165Hz, this laptop is a great bet for both high resolution titles and competitive games alike. Plus, with AI accelerated performance in games, including via Nvidia's DLSS 3 and a 13th gen CPU that clocks in at up to 5 GHz, you're sure to be well covered in the frame rate department. Learn more at the first links in the description below. The first thing you want to grab yourself is one of these, not specifically a MacBook, any modern laptop will do, or even desktop computer, and head over to the one and only PCPartPicker.com. Now, full disclaimer, this is not an ad. I wish it was, to be honest. PC Part Picker is the best site at the moment for picking computer parts. It basically allows you to run through component by component and gives you spec and details on each part. It's not necessarily going to tell you what you should pick, that's kind of what this video is for, and this is all about trying to allow you to decode PC Part Picker. It's the best tool out there, but it's still not often the most simple thing in the world to use. Now, when it comes to a build, you first need to decide how much money you want to spend, something we've covered in both an article on our website and in a YouTube video. For the purposes of today's tutorial, I'm going to be focusing in on the $1,500 budget, but this video is applicable to any amount of money you want to spend within reason. Now, a couple of general rules for a build is that your GPU and CPU should make up around about half of the overall money that you spend, maybe even slightly more with the two combined. For super budget builds, you want to make sure that the graphics card takes up the biggest portion of your build possible, while for more high-end systems, you want to make sure that the graphics card certainly isn't bottlenecked, basically restricted by other cheaper component choices. All about finding that right balance. We've made a really good video on the best CPU and GPU combos, which is worth checking out, as those are the two most important parts to get right first of all. And that is indeed where I'm going to start. I'm going to try and apply my rules as closely as possible, and spend around about $750 of my total $1,500 budget on the CPU and graphics card combined. So in terms of the CPU, I know that for a mid-range build like this one, an i5 or Ryzen 5 tier chip will be best. The i3 Ryzen 3 is good for the budget range, i7 Ryzen 7 high-end, and i9 Ryzen 9 for the top-end configs. Now what we can do is we can filter things down, so we can go and look here and enable Ryzen 5, and also on the Intel side, i5. I also want to make sure we're using the latest architectures that are available to us. So for CPUs recently, that would be Zen 3 and Zen 4 for AMD, and then also Alder Lake and Raptor Lake for the 12th and 13th gen. I'm then going to sort by price low to high. All of my prices today will be from Newegg, so we'll be using those as the common denominator throughout. Of course, you can save some money by shopping at other retailers if you wish. AMD's Ryzen 5 5600X is coming out as one of the cheapest options, and I know it's a very good shout. The new 13600K is great, but a bit too expensive. But I think what I want is something in the middle. Something maybe Intel's i5 13600KF, the same as the K but without any included graphics. Or maybe this would be better actually, the i5 13400F. At $200, it's going to make up less than half of our CPU and GPU budget, leaving plenty of room left for the graphics card. And while it lacks internal graphics, we don't need those anyway, because of course we'll be using the dedicated ones on the GPU. Have a look at the clock speed. It boosts up to 4.6 as well, so that's pretty high. It's about as high as a Ryzen 5600X. So I think that's a good choice for now, but don't be afraid to change parts later, and I'll explain how I would do that shortly. Video card then, I've got about $500 to spend, so I'm going to select my $500 maximum, let's say $600. I always find it's nice to see, what is at the upper end of my budget, and let's also set the minimum to around about the $400 price mark, because I know that we can spend at least $400. A few immediate options coming up then that are in budget. We've got a 3070 3070, that's a decent choice, as is a 6800 XT for a little bit more money. 3060 Ti is also a solid shout, but of course we've got that 3070 budget, so the higher we can go on the graphics card, the better. And looking through my list, the only other option is an RX 6750 XT. So I know so far that my choices are 6750 XT, 3070, and maybe a 3060 Ti. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to have a look at which of the two is better. I'm going to guess that a 3070 is probably where we want to go, but it never hurts just to double check. So 6750 XT versus 3070, and some of my reading online would suggest that it's a pretty even fought battle between the two options. The 6750 XT has matured better than the 3070 with drivers though, and is one of the cheaper options, so I think that's probably what I'm going to go for. Taking a look here, they've got this nice Aorus Elite for $529, but this Power Color Red Devil card comes in much cheaper at $450. It's all about which of the cards you like the look of the most, and of course that provide the nicest performance. Let's just have a look. Yeah, I'm not being funny, that meets my criteria perfectly, and that means I spent so far just under $660 on the GPU and CPU combo. I'm under budget so far then, meaning we might be able to come back later and spend more money here. Next up, I would then start ticking off all the parts that are easy to determine based on what I've just picked. So the power supply is a natural one. I know that a 6750 XT needs a 750 watt power supply, so I'm going to pick a decent 750 watt unit. We've got an 80 plus gold one here from Corsair. I like that RM lineup. We talk quite highly of them, so that's what I'm going to pick. Memory-wise, I know that a build like this is going to want 32 gigs of memory. Cheaper systems can live with 16 gigs, but I want the full 32. Given the fact I've gone for an Intel CPU, I can either go for DDR4 or DDR5 memory. I'm probably on the lower end, so DDR4 to me is going to make the most sense, but I know I definitely want 32 gigs, and this $100 kit here from Corsair is perfectly viable. When it comes to memory, by the way, basically any kit with good speeds is worth considering. So if there's any particular aesthetic you want, have a dig through the list until you find one that you like. I know the CPU isn't overclockable, but I'd still like a CPU cooler, but at this stage of the build, it's not really a priority. Storage though is. I've got plenty of games that I want to store, and I want something that can provide enough capacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter by the brands that I perhaps most associate with. So let's have a look, shall we? Massive list of companies. I quite like some of Samsung's drives. I also like drives from Kingston and from Crucial, as I find these three manufacturers to all be pretty reliable. I also want to make sure that I've got PCI Gen 3 or Gen 4 drives, so I'm going to tick these two boxes, with at least 1 terabyte of capacity. So let's tune our minimum capacity up to 960 gig and see what comes of it. For just $70, I can pick up Samsung's 970 Evo Plus, which to be honest is a good starting point. I also know that if I want 2 terabytes of storage, it's only going to cost me another $60 or $70. So I'm going to keep that in the back of my head and stick with this drive for now. That takes the total budget up then to $958. All of these parts are new eggs. You could shop elsewhere and save a bit of money. Motherboard is next up, and because I've gone for a non-overclockable CPU, this chip doesn't have the all-important K designation at the end. A B-series motherboard, like a B760 design, is going to be great. Intel B760, and what I'm then going to do is research the best B760 motherboards to buy. We've made a massive guide compiling some of our favourite options, which you can read through to learn more, and I'll link these below. I can see here that if I scroll right down to our conclusion that the B760 Strix Wi-Fi from Asus ranks very well, but I'm also going to make sure I've got a bit of a backup choice that not only supports DDR4, but is also perhaps maybe a little bit cheaper. Aha, there we go. MSI have got a Tomahawk board that's also going to work well. So let me hit back over to PC Part Picker, and then I'm going to filter down and have a look which of those boards is cheaper. So the Strix board from Asus, the DDR4 variant, is coming in at $239, while the Tomahawk board from MSI is coming in at $199. So $199, that's going to save me some money and is going to work perfectly for this system. We're up then to about $1,200, just under, and I still need to pick out a case and fine-tune the rest of my parts. A case then is next natural step, and I have a few ideas as to cases I'd like to consider for this build. Corsair's 4000D Airflow was on my list, although it's basic without any RGB fans or anything like that. NZXT's H5 Flow though was also a consideration, and at under $100 with RGB, I think it's going to be great. In fact, I think I've got that wrong. I think the Elite is the one with with RGB. But this is still going to work well and still going to look the business. That then brings my final price up to $1,256. Said I wanted to buy a CPU cooler. I don't want something too expensive, as frankly it's a bit of a waste in this build, and I like some of Deepcool's options. They provide sometimes better performance than their Cooler Master 212 rivals with a nicer aesthetic and a cheaper price point. So I'm going to add that one in, and that brings the total money up to $1,300. That then makes this build about $200 over budget. It's a great system now if you've only got $1,300 to spend, but how would I allocate the cash if I had some more money? The GPU is the obvious place, but before I do that, I do want to add in a bit more storage. I'm conscious that the 1TB might not last me long enough, and that was a bit of an entry-level option just to really get things going and leave the slate and the options open for the build as we progressed. 970 Evo Plus then, a 2TB drive. How much is one of those going to cost me? $219. Something doesn't seem quite right there, so I'm going to see if there are any other alternative options out there. I know Samsung do a 980 version, which is slightly better and might provide us more capacity at a lower price. But alas, I'm not really having any luck, so let me go back to the drawing board and tune right through those options once again. I'm going to set the minimum capacity this time around to just under 2TB, so 1920, that's totally fine, and filter by Gen 3 and Gen 4 NVMe's. I'm getting a few options, some of which are really cheap, a bit too cheap to be honest with you, but WD's SN850X Black Edition is a great option that's coming in for $160, slightly more than the last drive I added in, but with double the capacity and Gen 4 speeds, it's a way better choice. That then brings my total budget to $1,386.41 including shipping, but I think we want to max out that $1,500 budget. I've already upped the case to something a bit nicer than my initial expectations, added more storage and popped in a CPU cooler to keep temperatures low and audible levels nice and quiet. As such, I'm afraid 6750 XT, time for you to go. Let's see how much we've got left now. We've got $570, so let's see what the best possible card we can get is for the price point. Let's tune right down to $570, that'll do, and see what we can possibly get. Let's sort by the price, highest to lowest. Let's see what Newegg have currently got at this price point. 6800 XT is a pretty compelling option at $569, but can it be beaten? I don't think it can. 6800 XT it is. Of course, if you want an Nvidia card, go for the next best option. Something like a 3070 will be totally fine, and let's see how the build is shaping out. With $6.41 over budget, and while there are some obvious weaknesses I could pick out with this build, the CPU is perhaps a little underpowered, and AMD's 5800 X3D might certainly be worth considering, but you can quickly see how we got the build going. Allocate about 50% of the budget to the GPU and CPU combined, and start with these components first. Watch or read up guides that recommend the best CPU and GPU combos to ensure you haven't got that bottleneck in. Then add in the right amount of power based on your GPU's recommended requirements, and a good amount of memory for gaming at your chosen resolution. 16 gigs for 1080p, 32 gigs for 1440p and beyond. Of course, those looking to build a productivity-based system for video editing, streaming, the more memory, the better. Once this is in, add in your motherboard, pick the storage, and see just how much cash is left for a GPU. Make sure you get a case that fits all of your components, and then you should have yourself a pretty balanced config. I'll link everything mentioned down below, including the latest deals on tech over at Newegg. Not an ad, but it is an affiliate link. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you very soon here on the GeekaWhat channel.